taught part-time at Purdue College of Technology through the spring of 2015. He's a partner with Artist-Owned in historic downtown Lafayette and an Indiana artisan. Al will be sharing his craft inspiration, some of the pictures of his travels. I think it's going to be Cuba. So help me welcome, if you would, our guest speaker today, Al Knight.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm a bit nervous. Let's start. I'd like to take you back to, if you will go with me for a few minutes, to Christmas of 1954. Christmas of 1954. And if you look on the screen, there's a little guy to the left who's 13 years old. That's me. Here's what happens when you grow 65 years older. At any rate, it's Christmas time, and our Christmas on a small family farm in Ohio. And you mentioned that many of you grew up on farms. It was not unlike any other. We were people who were careful with money. I had hoped that I would receive a leather jacket for Christmas. And maybe if I were lucky, a Western-style jeans, because I was still wearing those trousers with the bibs on. And at 13, it was time for me to, up my act. So Christmas came. The presents were all in front of us, and we unwrapped. And I looked at mine. And I thought, my goodness, what have I received? So I opened the first one, and it's a Bolsey 35 millimeter camera. And I opened the second one, and by golly, it was a Bell & Howell TDC Vivid projector. And incidentally, by the way, that it's right here in this image. And there's the daylight screen that came with it, and the camera is hidden. Now, just to be on the safe side, in case the equipment didn't work today, I brought it along with me.
It still works, huh?
And it still works? Incidentally, I keep the receipt in case I want to take it back. And just so you know, it cost $67.50, which was a lot of money in 1954. And the whole outfit cost $132.77. I thought, my God, has my dad struck it rich? So as the day went on, the prize was finally announced that parents were going to take us to Florida. And I was going to be out of school, but I was also going to be the photographer. And so I had a month, if you will, to learn something about depth of field, something about metering, something about focus, because I'd never operated a nice 35 millimeter camera before. But anyway, off we went. February of the next year, 1955, we're off to Florida. We went to the usual places, Kiwanis Springs, of course. We went to the Ringling Museum. We went to Sarasota, of course, where the Ringling Museum is. And this image, if you can see it, happens to be Palm Avenue in Sarasota. It's changed a bit today, but that's what it looked like in 1955. And that's one of my early photos. We also traveled down that highway that went to Key West, and we came upon Key West, and there was a big sign, and it said, "Excursion to Cuba." And my dad said, "Let's go." It left one morning and came back the next afternoon, and I thought, well, that would be exciting. A 13-year-old kid, Dad wanted to go to Cuba. And this was in 55, so we were free to go. Mom said no. Mom said no. So we got in our car and headed back north and came home. Now let's take you forward 65 years. I've always wondered what was going on that Dad wanted to go to Cuba and Mom didn't. See. So at any rate, I had a chance to go. I was a part of a Department of Treasury sanctioned educational and cultural program. This was in 2013, and so we were able to leave from the United States for one of the first times. And in spite of all the restrictions, and in spite of the embargo and all of the political unrest over those same years, I was headed for Cuba. I was a part of 15 photographers, and those photographers were sponsored by the Santa Fe workshop in New Mexico. Anyway, we arrived at Cuba, and one of the very first things that we came across, and Rodney's going to show us now, is what was called the Tropicana nightclub. And it's recreated now from the nightclub that was active in the 40s and 50s. And it saw the lights of people like Sammy Davis Jr. and Liberace and all of the well-heeled people who took day trips from Miami to Cuba, and on the way they'd gamble, and after they get there they do unmentionable acts of decadence, lavishness, and indulgence. And certainly it was mob controlled. And if you take a look at the next shot, it tells you a little bit more about the Tropicana nightclub. And just in case you've forgotten, Rookie Ricardo was one of the persons who was allegedly to have sung in the Tropicana. At least he did on television on the I Love Lucy show. But he never performed in the actual Tropicana club in Cuba. But he did own a club by the same name in New York City. By the way, Ricardo was the grandson of the founder of Bacardi Rum. But anyway, we were enjoying the show. We got free cigars. The ladies got a rose. We had all the rum we wanted to drink. And as the evening went on, the show got a little wilder. And you can't see it here, but if you look real closely, there's certain bottoms that are showing. And now I know why Mom didn't want us to go to Cuba. And now I know why Dad wanted to go. Well, let's go to the next slide. And what I'd like to show you next. What I'd like to show you next is just an overview of Havana. Well, the slide is, there's one before that, I think. There you go. This is Havana as it's frozen in time. And although this was 2013, it could have been 1955. It could have been 1955. And my interest in going was to learn something about the infrastructure, something about the economy, something about the culture, and more importantly, the person who was on the streets. And so as a street photographer, I was curious about life in Cuba from the point of view of the ordinary citizen, Now indeed, Cuba has areas, and this is Havana specifically that I'm speaking about, has areas that have been restored. If you turn to the next slide, if it'll come up, this is the National Hotel of Cuba, and it's on the Gulf of Mexico. It's near the Straits of Florida, and it was opened in 1930, and it was beautifully restored. And it saw the residents of Mickey Mantle, Frank Sinatra, Winston Churchill, Marlon Brando, Ernest Hemingway, and the whole group. And if you can bear with me, Cuba was the summer place, or the holiday place, or the vacation place for people who were well-heeled. It was a vacation spot that was very, very popular. And this particular hotel was restored as to what it looked like in the 30s. One more image, the next image over, which is up now, is a boutique motel. And it too has been restored. And if you can picture one section along Mercedes Street in the old section of Havana, there's a series of buildings that have been completely restored. And part of the plan was to restore as many buildings as possible, but you might guess that some were on the to-do list and some never, ever be restored. And if you think about it, nothing's changed since 1955 through 59. It's like the country stopped when the revolution came. The country stopped moving forward when the Civil War occurred. So if we turn the page, what we begin to see is the reality of Old Havana. And this was the building named the Maravilla, which stands for marvel or wonder. And if you take a look at it carefully, you can see that it is standing up literally only because of the wooden braces that are holding up the arches. And building after building after building after building in Old Havana looks just like this. Let's take a look at the next shot. This was in a very expensive apartment building. Tile floor, mosaic tile, grand stairway to the second floor. It reminds me a little bit of some of our newer hotels here in town. Perhaps it could be a hub, the latest and the greatest, if you will. But this is what it might have been in 1955 through 59, but today it's virtually falling down. And I worry about those stair steps. The next slide then gives us just another peek, and it's an image that includes a dog, an animal, and the dogs are not feral dogs, but the dogs do have their neighborhoods, and they have neighbors who feed them, or local residents, indeed, take care of the animals. But again, you can see that the infrastructure certainly is needing some repair. If you're with me, it's as if time stood still, and we've gone forward 65 years, and nothing has been, very little has been repaired or maintained. Take another look. Art Deco at its best in the 50s, and today it's nearly in ruins. So one of the images of Cuba is the fact that it has not been changing hardly at all since that revolution, because there is little money, if any, for renovation and repair. One more image, and I like this one a lot. This happens to be the electrical panel in one of the apartment buildings where we stayed. So if you happen to be an electrician, I guess you're okay, but otherwise I would worry about the safety of the electrical system in the entire city. And this was just one example in every building that we looked at. And one example also of the sewage system that was in place. In this particular scene, this is a rooftop, and if you can see the clothes, lots of sun in Havana, and this certainly was how you dried your clothes. If you look carefully, on that last slide, there's several tubs of barrels. That's rainwater that they saved during the raining season, and that's their water supply. So you're beginning to see a picture. Well, let's talk a little bit about the economy, and that's this slide. And this happens to be me, along with a proprietor of a regulated product store, or this would be the grocery store for the average Cuban who lives in Old Havana. A pound of coffee, 4 pesos. That's about 18 cents. Dozen eggs, 1 peso, 4 cents. Really reasonable. Cup of coffee, 1 peso. Sugar, 15 pesos. The average Cuban, this is important, earns $20 per month. $20 per month. So if you can imagine that converted to pesos and what you have to live on, $20 a month. College professors, any college professors here? Retired. $80 a month. $80 a month. Police officers, $150 a month. So you begin to see how the economic structure is inverted, and those that are hired to protect the status quo are paid the most. And those that are lower on the chain are paid the least. And college professors are toward the lower end of that range. On the other hand, rents are low, education is free, health care is free, and life goes on in Cuba. One more thing, you're a little bit ahead of me, sir. Can we go back one? Oh. One more thing. The economy is fueled by world tourists. Not just Americans, but world tourists. And it's funded and fueled by the sale of rum. It's funded by the sale of cigars. And it's funded by the influx of money that comes from Cuban Americans who now live in the United States as money is sent back into the economy. So that economy then has created a second layer, if you will. So instead of, so you can go to the next slide now. So instead of money exchanging in pesos, money is exchanged in cucs. Cuc is a Cuban convertible currency. And it's worth a little more than $1. So basically you can take a dollar bill and you'll get back, I think it's 90 cents, if I have this right, 90 cents in cucs. And they keep the 10 cents to contribute to the government. But the point of the story is, in the hotel where we stayed, which is a 5-star Cuban host, Spanish hotel for tourists, we used cucs. And if we bought a cup of coffee on the street, it was 5 pesos. But if we bought a cup of coffee in the hotel, it was 2 cucs. If we bought food on the street, it was 10 cucs, or pardon me, 10 pesos for a sandwich or a piece of pizza. In the hotels, we could get lobster for 20 cucs. So there's a second economy that was geared toward the tourists, toward the world travelers, that was separate from and above that of those that were native members of the society and the city. 5 minutes. Okay, well, let's jump ahead and just take a look at automobiles for a second, and we can just kind of speed through this, if you will. The city streets are filled with hundreds of vehicles, and they're all from 1955 and 1959. And the main point that I want to say, and you can go to an extra slide, is that many of these are converted to taxis. And this is a story that I want to leave you with. And the taxis then are driven by, guess who? People who have an education and could speak English, and that would be the professors. So the professors earn an additional $30 per day driving taxis to haul guys like me around. So if you could move forward with me, you can see an example of the kinds of vehicles that are on the street. And incidentally, the cars are now created from salvage cars like the one you see, and they're created from parts that they are imported from Germany and from probably Russia. Let's go on, since we're running low on time. We'll see what... Oh, I like this image. That's a picture of a nice restored Pontiac with a flat tire, and it seems like the fellow is more interested in the driver than he is in fixing her tire. But that's just my opinion. Let's go forward a couple more slides since we're running short. I wanted to talk about the people on the street, because this was one of our purposes, is to interact with individuals who lived and worked, if they worked at all, in Old Havana. And this I call the happy hour, the evening happy hour. And the guy, the second to the left, offered me a drink. I gracefully declined. But the point of the story is that people here are humbling, welcoming, and very friendly to us. And if we thumb through the next pictures, this fellow, this cigar smoker, we were given as photographers on this cultural exchange cigars, candy bars, toothpaste, baseballs, and we'd hand them out to individuals who we thought were deserving. So I gave this guy, his name's Charlie, a cigar, and I believe till today, he'd be my best friend. Turn the page, and we see examples of people who are not as willing to pose. Another image is an individual who is certainly drying her clothing and was a little reluctant for me to take her picture, but the real question is, what is that buggy all about? Or a work in progress, I imagine, for some individuals. Again, as you turn the page, individuals not working, hanging out, certainly willing to talk to us. This is interesting in that we soon believed that some of the people were planted to pose for us and then make sure that we understood that we were in Cuba, and they were very proud, by the way, of that heritage. One more slide, and it gives you still an example of the neighborhoods and the kind of individuals that live there and the living conditions they have. If you turn the page one more time, a guy giving me the thumbs up. His name was Pete, if I recall. And what's really interesting is this is an open junction box right along the street, which was typical of the infrastructure. So if you were gathering the notion of the presentation, there are some unintended consequences to the very people living on the street of being in this frozen state since in the 50s. Oh, by the way, this is important. We were invited into people's homes, and the home we were invited in had a stairway to the second floor. And we climbed up that stairway, and I was really concerned whether I would come out alive, but I did. Here I am. And so let me take you a tour through an average home in Cuba. And if you turn the page to the next slide, this is the bedroom. Has all the necessities, a fan, artwork on the wall. Turn the page. This is the kitchen. I feel really guilty because we just spent about $20,000 doing over our kitchen with granite countertops. There's no such thing as granite countertops in Cuba. This is the sewing room, and this is the child care center. These are the old buildings, by the way, that the owners left during the revolution, thought they'd be back in a year or two. Never came back. The housekeepers took over and moved in their families, and they've lived there ever since. This would be the laundry room, and the next image would be, we'll call it the pantry. Here's what I want to leave you with. We also had an opportunity to visit the Buena Vista Social Club. Some of you have heard of it, I'm sure. It's on Mercedes Street, and it's a recreated version of the social club from the 40s and 50s, from that grand old era before the revolution. And they play some wonderful Cuban music. And as a matter of fact, Ry Cooder, you may know the story, who's a legendary producer, also hunted up all the legendary Cuban musicians and took them to Carnegie Hall and made them famous. And today you can buy all kinds of Cuban music by Ry Cooder of the Buena Vista Club. Turn the page, and you can see the kind of activity we had. And if we go to one more page, this is this afternoon or the sunset in Cuba, and it's where I want to leave you with one more slide. And this, by the way, is Laura. And Laura was one of our guides. Each of us had a couple of guides that spoke Spanish. Laura is a citizen of Cuba. She's graduated from Havana University. Her dad is a professor there, and his dad does what? Drives a taxi to make extra money. Just so you know, each person has to work 2 years to pay back their education. So this gal is doing her public service as serving as a guide to guys like me who come in on a cultural exchange. And that's in return for her education. The guys spend 2 years in the military. The point is that she would like to be a touring agent at some time and would like to come to the United States. And at the same time, we who visit there have so much that we have to be thankful for, that sometimes we forget how other people in other countries are living a very different life than we are. Thank you.